Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I will be continuing to review Love is Blind Italy. This is episode number 4. Okay, so the episode begins with Nicola and Karen. And Nicola proposes to Karen. The last episode ended where we didn't know if Karen said yes or no. And we see that Karen accepts this proposal. Personally, I think this is a mistake. We shall see, but I don't like how Nicola spoke to Karen and how he almost kind of downplayed their connection, talking about how it could be an infatuation. But I'm sure Karen is probably thinking it's still maybe worth giving it a chance. For me, I don't really know if I would have accepted that proposal. Let me know what you guys think, because I was like, I don't really love some of the words that he said to her. I do not. And at the end of the day, I think as Karen, I would feel a little bit like second best to Ludovica. So then we go ahead and we see their reveal. Karen looked amazing, by the way. I just had to say that. She had this blue dress on. The color was beautiful on her. She looked like a mermaid. And when the doors opened, it seemed like I got the sense that Nicola was almost taken aback by how beautiful she was. I don't know if he was expecting that. Karen definitely seemed happy with what she saw as well. So attraction wise, it seems like there's some chemistry there. So that's always a good sign. So that's a good place to start. Okay, so now we are out of the pods, which I'm like, thank God, because the pods are such a tough thing. We have 5 engaged couples. So we have Giovanni and Georgia, Parmi and Georgiana, Alessandro and Eliza, Alessandro B and Yoni, and then we have Nicola and Karen. So there are 5 engaged couples that are now planning to go on their honeymoon. So we see they are going to Morocco for their honeymoon, and we find out that Alessandro B and Yoni couldn't make it to their honeymoon. Basically, they said that they are just going to be doing the second phase of the experiment in Italy. Strange. And I'm only saying that's strange because I really think that the honeymoon phase is important, because it's just you as a couple and you're learning things about each other without having the outside world involved in terms of your phones and your work and day-to-day life. So I think it's a pretty critical step, but maybe there are reasons why Alessandro B and Yoni couldn't do it, so that's fine. Okay, so then we see Giovanni and Georgia, and Giovanni basically says to her that he grew up with the belief that sex was only basically for procreation. And Georgia's confused because she's like, well, is that what you believe? Giovanni says no, that's not what he believes, but that's just how he, I guess, grew up with some of the faith that he had. I don't know if he was Catholic or what denomination he was. I found this to be odd because in my mind, I was like, why is he saying that if he is not someone that necessarily believes in that? I just thought that telling her that was kind of pointless. And it made me wonder if it's a sense of foreshadowing, if he's trying to say that maybe he low-key does want to do that. I just found it very, very strange. This isn't something you believe in, so why bring it up at all? Odd. So then we go back to Nicola and Karen, and we see Nicola saying he didn't get real closure regarding the whole Ludovica situation. And then Karen is basically saying that Nicola will need to prove to her that he can, that she can trust him, which I think is fair because essentially he, did kind of pull the rug out from under her in the pods. So I think that Karen does need to kind of tread carefully with Nicola and give him that ability to really prove to her that he's really in it with her, Then we see Ludovica and Davide, and Ludovica is saying she wasn't happy when she first saw Davide. I'm sorry, guys, I don't want to laugh, but that's what I presumed. She's honest, and she says that she thought that he looked older than his age and that he wasn't really her type, right? But she says that no matter what, she's happier now, And I think that this is a perfect situation where Davide's aura and personality and everything kind of carries him, and I think that this just goes to show you that when you have some level of confidence and personality and aura, that really can trump just being focused on the physical. Clearly, Ludovica likes a lot of other things about Davide that has made up for her feeling like, she might have been a little disappointed with his appearance. So Davide basically says that he expected Ludovica to be taller, and that he expected her to be almost like a beau, like a hippie, I think he said. But was surprised to realize that she's actually kind of posh or like bougie, kind of similar to him. So he didn't really expect that from her. Okay, then we go back to Alessandro and Eliza, and they're basically having a great time in the pool. They're all over each other. You can see that the chemistry between these two is strong, okay? Like, they're both really feeling each other. We see Eliza saying that she's more of an intense personality and that Alessandro is a lot more laid back. And then Eliza basically says that she will have to work on training him, which I thought was a strange thing to say. I feel like she needs to elaborate on what she means by that. Like, training him to be what? Yeah, I didn't know what she meant by that. And I don't really like the words training when it involves people, especially adults. I'm like, what are we training? What are we doing? So I did think that was a little bit strange. Then we go back to Parmi and Georgiana, and they're in the pool. We see Parmi basically saying that he is attracted to Georgiana, and that it was hard for him to connect the voice to her face and her body at first. But as time went on, he kind of was like, okay, this is making sense, But personally, in terms of Love is Blind, whenever a guy says he's struggling to connect this, a voice to like an actual appearance, I do start to wonder if that person is attracted to their partner, which maybe sounds silly, but I'm like, I wonder that. So I don't really know fully how much Parmi is attracted to Georgiana at this point. I'm not sure. And we also see Parmi say that he created an intellectual connection with Georgiana, but I guess we'll see if he's able to create like a physical one, because he mentioned the intellectual one, but like, I guess the whole point of this time in the experiment is to see if there's also that physical side too. So we shall see. But with Parmi, I'm still not sure how he feels about Georgiana when it comes to the physical and attraction. Yeah. And then we go back to Nicola and Karen, and Nicola says growing up, he would always have like, he'd talk back. Maybe he was a little bit hot-tempered, and this is something that his dad always told him to kind of watch out for. And we see him telling Karen that he wished that he listened to his dad more growing up. Nicola also mentions that his ability to not continue to play soccer, he saw as a big like failure in his life, and that was a very hard thing for him to overcome. So we kind of see that he's opening up to Karen more about things, involving what he's been through in the past. Karen basically asks if Nicola would have done anything differently in terms of the pods and everything. And Nicola says that knowing what he knows now, he would have chosen Karen sooner. I guess that's fair, for him to say. But once again, I don't really know about Nicola. I feel like Karen needs to tread carefully and really watch him because of what happened with Ludovica and that whole situation. Okay, so then we go back to Davide and Ludovica, and Ludovica asks when his last relationship was. Davide basically says that he was in a relationship in 2021 and that essentially he got broken up with. And it wasn't because of infidelity or anything. It just didn't really work out between them. And we see Davide basically saying he's very comfortable with Ludovica and he feels like he can tell her anything that's on his mind. And I always think that that's a really good sign in a partner. That means that like they are somewhat connected and very comfortable with each other, which I think is huge. Davide mentions that he's glad they can make sandcastles instead of Christmas trees. And Ludovica immediately clocks that and she's like, okay, he's definitely talking about everything that happened with Nicola. So Ludovica is like, okay, you want to talk about it? Let's talk about it, right? Because it's like, Davide kind of does this thing where he like indirectly makes comments, but he doesn't say it directly. And Ludovica basically says that, everything that happened, she was just like confused. We see Ludovica telling the cameras that Davide is very insecure and that he tries to come across like things don't bother him, but deep down they really do, and he needs reassurance. And we kind of hear Ludovica alluding to the fact that she wants to give Davide that reassurance. Now, I do understand how Davide could be feeling some kind of way after what happened between Ludovica and Nicola. But I think that he needs to kind of not let his like thoughts run away with him or insecurities run away with him, because I still do think that him and Ludovica have a really good thing. Okay, so then we go back to Eliza and Alessandro is basically going in on the food that they have. I was like, literally you could hear like the chewing sounds. I was like, what is happening here? Like, that food must be good. But you can clearly tell that Eliza's like annoyed, you know, and she's telling him, we talked about like manners and stuff. And he's joking, saying that normally he eats with his hands. And all I can say is these two are very different. And I know how they say like opposites attract. And a lot of times you see a really laid back guy with a woman that's a little more high strung. But I don't know how much this is going to work. I do feel like Eliza could get really annoyed with Alessandro. That's what I'm picking up on. Although this is like a very tiny thing where it's like just how he chooses food. I don't know why, but I feel like there's more sense of Eliza getting annoyed with him in the future. So we shall see. And then they end up discussing kids, and Eliza is very honest and says that she's ready to have kids now or within a year. Alessandro is like, whoa, that's a little too early for me. And, you know, Eliza is like, you can tell she's kind of a little worried about that timeline when it comes to kids. And this is something that worried her in the pods. But at the same time, she says that she's glad that he's being honest about how he feels. So she has to kind of respect that. And I think because they have such a strong connection, she does feel like, you know, as long as they do discuss things, that they could work through these things. And I agree, but I do think it's tough because I feel like they need to come to some kind of compromise, right? It shouldn't just be like one or the other. And at the end of the day, Eliza brought up this age gap in the pods, right? And all Alessandro did was kind of reassure her that he was ready to take these steps. So I don't really think it's fair for him to be backtracking now that they're out of the pods, right? Yeah, that's the only thing I feel about that, because I feel like Eliza was worried about this timeline. So I don't like the idea of him like backtracking now and saying, oh, that's too soon. Because I feel like this is probably something they discussed in the pods. And I get the sense that Alessandro gave Eliza a lot of reassurance in this department that he's now like not giving now that they're in real life. So, okay, then we go back to Davide and Ludovica and we see that they're getting ready for bed. Davide says Ludovica looks better without makeup. Seems like things between these two are going very well. I feel like so far, this is the one couple that I'm like not really seeing any bumps. I'm like, okay. And I feel like they're very, very comfortable with each other. A lot more comfortable than even some of the other couples are at this point. That's what I pick up on. Okay, so then we go back to Giovanni and Georgia. We see that they're getting ready for bed. Giovanni is saying there's not really sexual chemistry between them yet. We see him telling the cameras this. And we basically see Giovanni ask Georgia to read some of the poetry that he wrote. Georgia says she's afraid Giovanni will basically lose interest in her. And I think that Georgia's picking up on something being off between her and Giovanni. It's so early, but there's something that she's picking up on there because she's almost feeling like Giovanni will get sick of her or lose interest in her. And that's not a very good feeling, especially to have so early on. They're way too early in the relationship for them to be worried about someone losing interest. I think it shows that there's something deeper wrong there. So then it's the next day and we see Giovanni and Georgia, and Georgia is basically saying that Giovanni slept on the couch, and that they mutually agreed to kind of take it slow in that department and get to know each other. But I low-key feel like this decision was probably made by Giovanni, because based on how Georgia felt, it seemed like she was a lot more comfortable sleeping in the bed and getting to know him in a more intimate way, if that's where things led. But it seems like Giovanni was the one saying there wasn't any sexual chemistry. So I'm assuming Giovanni was the one that said he wanted to sleep on the couch, which I think stings a little bit. And I'm only saying it stings because just because you sleep in the same bed doesn't mean you have to be intimate. I feel like him deciding to sleep on the couch is creating a sense of distance when it comes to that chemistry, that physical side of things. So I don't think it's the best sign. I do not. And personally, I just don't think that Giovanni is attracted to Georgia, which is kind of perplexing to me. Georgia is a very beautiful girl. I don't get it, right? Because it seemed like they had such a strong connection in the pods. This is the one couple that I'm like confused, because I guess I thought Giovanni would be into Georgia. So I'm like, what's missing here? And clearly Georgia's into Giovanni. If anything, I think she's really bothered by the fact that he's creating this physical distance, right? So let me know what you guys think about that, because I'm like, what's going on with Giovanni? Like, what is it about Georgia that he's not feeling? That's what I can't quite figure out. So then we go back to Parmi and Gergana, and we find out that they basically slept together. They seem to be very comfortable with each other. It seems like whatever happened the night before went well. And they almost seem like surprised that at this point they're as comfortable with each other as they are. So that's, to me, is always a good sign, because it's such early days. Okay, then we go back to Alessandro and Eliza, and we find out that they didn't sleep together, but that they had a great night together, and that they're just wanting to kind of wait to get to that point. We go to Nicola and Karen, and they ended up cuddling, but also decided to wait in terms of taking that next step to be into. Nicola is basically telling Karen about what happens to him when he falls for someone. And as he's speaking, Karen basically interrupts and goes, "Oh, are you talking about Ludovica?" Which I was like, this was so random, because he didn't seem to be talking about Ludovica. And in my mind, I'm like, why would he talk about Ludovica in the way of falling for her? But clearly you can see that, Karen is still kind of hung up with the whole thing that happened with Ludovica. I think this was a good moment for Nicola to reassure Karen that, there's nothing there, and that he made his choice and he's happy with his choice. Instead, Nicola says that Ludovica charmed him like a rattlesnake, and that it was hypnotizing. And that it was hypnotizing. And Karen literally has to cut him off and say that's enough. Because I'm like, why would you want to hear that the guy you got engaged to was basically hypnotized by another woman? And this is another opportunity where Nicola is terrible with his words. And I don't know if he's just like not the brightest up here, but in my head, I'm like, when you speak, you have to think about how it makes other people feel. And this is something about Nicola that I do not like, because he did this in the pods, right? When he came to Karen and said that Karen was just an infatuation that could fizzle out, that was another way of him being very insensitive to Karen's feelings. He's doing it again, right? Where instead of basically reassuring Karen in the choice that he made of choosing Karen, he's talking about how he was hypnotized by Ludovica. This is not the time, sir. This is not the time. Somebody needs to give, Nicola a lesson in emotional intelligence, because something's not right, okay? Like, this is crazy, I mean, that's just not what you want to hear as a woman. You don't want to hear that. I mean, the fact that Karen had to cut him off, there's something about Nicola that's almost like, hello, are you, read the room. Read the room. Oh my God. So then we go back to Ludovica and Davide. Davide basically says he feels like sleeping with her felt like he was sleeping with someone that he's already been married to for years, which is obviously a great sign. He's very comfortable with her. And Davide is basically worried about Ludovica seeing Nicola, and he says he's a very jealous person. So I don't blame Davide for being nervous. I think another reason Davide's nervous is because Nicola looks very different from Davide. Let's keep it real too, right? Like, Nicola he's pretty attractive. So I think Davide is also worried about it on that front as well, not just about the connection that Ludovica and Nicola built. So then we see Nicola basically telling the cameras that in the real world, he's very big on cutting people off, and that if Ludovica had did what happened to him in real life, he would have just cut Ludovica off. But obviously he's in a situation where he can't do that. Yeah, and I don't know. There's something about Nicola that I think that he can be very harsh with his words and insensitive. And I just don't know. Like, I feel like any woman that's with him has to be very secure within herself, because he's not an easy person to deal with. And he doesn't really understand, like, that certain things can hurt people's feelings. I feel like he doesn't take other people's feelings into account, or maybe he just doesn't think about it. And the weird thing about Nicola is I don't feel like he does it maliciously. I literally just don't think he understands that there's a time and a place to say things, and there's certain things you don't need to be saying. I'm like, what are we doing here? Okay, then we go back to Giovanni and Georgia, and Giovanni basically says he's excited to see Gergana. He says he wants to tell her he's regretful on how things ended with her. Guys, am I surprised? No, because I already knew that Giovanni was going to play in Georgia's face. Did I think it would happen this early? Did I think he would be so blatant about it? No, but you can already see and hear that he is regretting his choice. He is not into Georgia. He is not into her. The fact that he's so curious about Gergana already just shows you that he's not into her. But yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say about Giovanni at this point because Georgia never should have chosen him in the first place. So everything that's happening to Georgia, to me, I'm like, girl, you should have known. There's a reason almost every woman in that pod swerved Giovanni and felt bad for you when you got engaged. So Giovanni is just doing what he's meant to do at this point. Okay, so we see that all the couples meet up for the first time. And when Parmi and Gergana show up, Gergana is wearing like a cheetah dress. It's really cute. It's like red and like cheetah, or maybe like pink. And we see, or we hear Giovanni when he sees Gergana in this dress walking towards him for the first time. He basically like roars. He's like, "Oh, rawr." If this side hasn't piped down, pipe down. Rawr. Could never be me. The way, like, so embarrassing. Like, what are we doing here? We then see Giovanni telling the cameras that he likes Gergana, and he says that he would have dated her for sure. So once again, he likes what he sees. He finds Gergana attractive, and he's clearly regretting his decision. But I think people forget the whole point of this show is called Love is Blind, right? There is a reason he cut her off in the pods. I don't really know why, but there has to be a reason, because when he cut her off in the pods, he was so sure that he was making the right decision. So I don't like, especially on Love is Blind, I don't like how men change their tune once they see someone. Like, nah. To me, that's never a good sign. Okay, we see Nicola and Ludovica talking, and Ludovica says that she didn't like that Nicola basically told Davide that Ludovica says the same things to every single guy, basically to kind of have a sense of doubt in Davide about her. Ludovica says that no matter what happened, she's never, lied or not been honest, and is just saying the same things to everyone. Nicola responds and he's like, how am I supposed to know you're not that about you? Like, how does he know that she's being honest? Nicola basically says that he opened up to her a lot and thought that she really knew him. But then realized that Ludovica didn't understand him at all in terms of how things ended. Ludovica basically says that she just let her insecurity get the best of her. And I don't know if Nicola understands that Ludovica's decision to cut him off in the pods didn't really have a lot to do with Nicola as a person. I feel like Nicola's taking this very personal, but it essentially had everything to do with Ludovica. It was all about her insecurity, I don't think that she cut him off because of a lack of connection. I just think that she got extremely insecure, and she was really worried that once they had the reveal, he wouldn't like what he saw, and I feel like Nicola is taking this like way too personal. You can just tell he's taking it very personal, and I don't really get it. Nicola basically says that Ludovica's not being honest with herself and that she needs to listen to herself. And I think Ludovica asks, and then Ludovica says that basically she had Nicola on her mind up until yesterday. So this is something she's been thinking about Nicola. That's basically what Ludovica says, that like he has been on her mind up until yesterday. And she wasn't really sure up until then. And I'm like, I just don't know. I don't think Ludovica should have said that. I feel like that's something that you probably keep to yourself. Like, I don't think Nicola needed to know that at this point, especially considering like Ludovica seems pretty happy with Davide. So Nicola basically says he's not happy for Ludovica. And Ludovica says that she's like happy for him. And once again, Nicola reiterates that Ludovica is not choosing what she wanted and that she just chose, what was left. And I don't know. I don't think that that's necessarily true, but I do know what Nicola means because she was choosing based off of her insecurity, right? I don't know if she was really choosing based off of how she felt. So I know what Nicola is saying by saying this, but no matter what, I don't think that you would want to be with someone as insecure as Ludovica is anyway, right? Like, I think Nicola needs to see the bigger picture. If someone is so insecure that they can't even make a choice as to how they feel, you probably don't want to be with that person. So after this conversation that Nicola and Ludovica have, we basically see Ludovica like goes up to Davide, they're talking, they're laughing, and Davide is basically saying that even though, he saw Ludovica talking to Nicola and that he might have been a little bit worried, that Ludovica kind of gave him that sense of reassurance after that conversation. So he feels more reassured in their relationship. On the other hand, we see that Nicola didn't really go up to Karen, and we see Karen basically freaking out, and she doesn't really feel that sense of reassurance from Nicola, right? Because Nicola is just talking to the other people and like the other couples, but hasn't really come up to her to reassure her in any kind of way. So Karen is clearly not happy about this. Okay, then we see Giovanni and Gorgana get to talk. Gorgana basically says that she was hurt by what Giovanni had said to her. Giovanni says that it was all going too well with Gorgana, and that scared him. And Gorgana basically calls him out and says that by the time they had talked, he had already made up his decision that he didn't want to continue with her, which is true, right? So you can tell Gorgana's kind of like suspicious, like, let's not spin the narrative. Like, you were pretty adamant on cutting things off with me. Gorgana basically calls Giovanni out for connecting with the other women as well that were a part of this experiment, that there were so many women he had connections with, right? Gorgana says he never asks about how she feels and that she kind of picks up on him being kind of always focused on himself and how he was affected by things and how he feels and what he meant. And Gorgana basically tells Giovanni that she's happy with Parmi, with the choice that she made in the end. And Gorgana says to him that she has nothing left to say to him and that everything she really needed to say, she had said in the pods. And I'm like, girl, period. What I like about Gorgana is she stands on business, okay? And I think Ludovica needs to take a page out of Gorgana's book, because one thing about Ludovica that I don't like is I do feel like she is a little bit of an emotional, like, manipulator. I think that when she said to Nicola that she was thinking about him up until yesterday, I don't think that needed to be said, right? Like, if she's as strong with Davide as she is, then I don't think these are things you need to be saying to someone, right? I like Gorgana because I think she can pick up on Giovanni's BS and she doesn't, let him just stand on that. I feel like Georgia has these rose-colored glasses on when it comes to Giovanni, and Gorgana doesn't. She's like, I know you for what you are. I see you for what you are. I'm glad I chose Parmi. And I like that about her. She didn't leave the door half open or adjacent or ajar or anything like that, right? It was very different from what we saw from Nicola and Ludovica's conversation. We see Ludovica telling Karen that Nicola said he didn't believe Ludovica was happy with her choice. And Karen is clearly upset. So upset that she ends up just completely walking away from Nicola while they're like trying to speak. And that is how this episode ends. So please like, comment, and subscribe. I will be reviewing the next couple episodes to come. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.